think it really is just like I'm writing to my taste. I'm writing about like women that I'm interested in and experiences that I'm interested in reading about, things I see, things I want to see like represented, emotions and atmospheres that I can't stop thinking about.
That's today's guest, Elle Nash. I stan any artist who allows their taste to guide them. I mean, it should go without saying, but that's not always the case. Elle has a super strong voice and aesthetic that I can note with her writing, and it was fascinating to hear how she developed that alongside her editing chops.
It really was just kind of like me on my own trying to figure it out and figure out the structure. And I did a big editing process. I would like make note cards for each chapter, trying to make sense of it, print it out, try and move stuff around in the way that I needed. And then even like editing it from backwards to the front, like starting with the last chapter and working backwards to make sure that everything made sense and that kind of thing.
This episode is such an interesting peek into Elle's creative process, and it's really inspiring to hear how she learned about craft through generative work, one-on-one mentorships, and writing workshops. Plus, she landed like the coolest agent ever. All that and more in today's episode. There's nothing to writing. All you do is sit down at a typewriter and bleed. Welcome to The Bleeders, a podcast and support group about book writing and publishing. I'm writer and podcaster Courtney Kosak, and each week I'll bring you new conversations with authors, agents, and publishers about how to write and sell books.
Hi, I'm Elle Nash. I'm the author of Animals Eat Each Other, Nudes, and Gag Reflex. And I'm the editor of Witchcraft magazine.
If there is a quickly emerging theme in this podcast, it's that I'm a big fan of prolific indie lit queens and DIY bad bitches, and Elle definitely follows in that tradition. Much like previous guests Chloe Caldwell and Chelsea Martin, she worked with Elizabeth Ellen, so we talked about that. And Elle is also a friend of Amanda McNeil, who was the very first Work in Progress guest. So, I mean, there are lots of shout outs of connections with former guests, so make sure to go back and check out all those episodes to see how the web is woven together. And actually, it turns out Elle and I may have taken a class together several years ago. This episode is like 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. So I wanted to have you on, and then Amanda recommended you too. So I was like, yes, amazing.
Yeah. How is it going so far with the podcast? Are you liking it?
I'm loving it. Yeah, I love to get to have these conversations, and I'm kind of at the getting ready to query stage with my manuscript. So I feel like it's really helpful.
Yeah, cool. Well, I am happy to answer any questions that you have.
Awesome. So I do a little lightning round up top. So when did you first identify as a writer?
I like wrote stories when I was in like middle school and that kind of thing. Like I remember like getting a little dolphin journal and like wanting to write a novel about a dolphin or something like that when I was really little. I still have that. I wish I did. But I didn't seriously start considering myself a writer until I was in high school and I was like discovering poetry. And I think that's when I was like, this is like really what I want to be, is I want to do this somehow, or I wanted to be like an artist of some sort.
Did you think it was possible, like, to be a working writer?
No, I actually I had no understanding of how that worked at all, even though like I had writers that I knew and admired. I don't think I like got that part of it, because even through college when I was writing prose and that kind of thing, I never wrote fiction, even though I loved it very much. It wasn't until about, I think in 2012 or 2013, I started wanting to try and write a sci-fi novel, and like that never happened. And then I took a writing workshop with Tom Spanbauer later that year in 2013. And it was there that like people were talking about like literary journals and like independent publishers and like agents and that kind of thing. And I think that's for me when I was like, oh, like that's what you do. Like you get published. And when I was like, you get published in literary magazines, something clicked for me where I was like, I didn't even know that you could do this, but I was like 26 or something. I hadn't even thought about it. So that was when when I like learned that that could happen, that's when I was like, okay, this is what I want to do. Like I want to figure out like how to get published.
And you did soon after.
Yeah, yeah. It was actually through taking Chloe's class, Chloe Caldwell's class, that I think we took that together.
Did we?
Were you with Amanda?
I have taken like 3 classes with Amanda, and I've taken from Chloe, yeah, like 3 or 4 times. She's the best.
Yeah. I think the first one I took with her with Amanda, I think you were in that, and that's where me and Amanda met.
Oh, funny.
Yeah. And seeing like what Chloe did and what she could do with her career, that's where I was like, I was seeing what she was doing and I was like, I'm going to figure out how to do that.
Oh, I love it. Okay, we're going to get more into this. What's your all-time favorite book?
I don't know. It's so hard. They always change based on like different things. Daryl by Jackie S. is like one of the best books I've read in the last like 5 years.
What's that book about?
It's about a guy who's a cuck and his experience living in the Pacific Northwest, being a cuck with his wife. It's really good. It's amazing. It's incredible. It's just written so well. And it's funny and it's heartwarming. And I don't know. I just loved it. It was good. Like the pace of it is good. The voice of it is like incredible. So yeah.
Nice. That's a good one.
Yeah.
I got to check that out. And it fits within like what I would think you would love. So that's funny.
Yeah.
What is your dream writing routine if you could pick?
I think if I could do it, I would wake up at 4 a.m. in the morning and I would work until like 6 or 7 and then have like get my daughter ready for school and then have my work day, and kind of do it in the morning. I've always worked better in the morning. And then in maybe some evenings do writing, but then some evenings like not do that, like actually live my life,
What do you wind up doing? What's the real writing routine?
So for a long time, I was writing every day, but because I just moved and I've been getting sick a lot because my daughter's in daycare now, I just try to get enough sleep at night. And then I'll wake up at 5 and sometimes I will do a little bit of work. I usually tell myself like even 10 minutes is okay. Like every 10 minutes does something, no matter what it is, like writing world wise, even if it's like editing something or doing stuff for my literary magazine or that kind of thing. And then I just, get ready for work, get my daughter ready for school, take her to school, go to work, come home, do house stuff, that kind of thing. And my husband just left to go back to the States for like half a year. So now I kind of like do have that free evening time where I'll be able to, I think, like focus more.
I have always been bad at maintaining a writing practice, but I started doing this thing. It's called like 750words.com or 750words.net or whatever. And you just write it in there. And for some reason, I've done it every day since I started for like
Nice.
a month, but it's just the little, you get a check mark, it's just a plain text thing. So I copy it over into my manuscript, but I'm like, I don't know. It's attainable. I think that's the good thing about it.
Yeah, you build up a momentum too. Like there was a long period of time where I built up a momentum after my daughter was born for a period of about 3 years. And then like 2020 hit. And then it was like I was obsessively working just a lot. Like I finished like 3 manuscripts that year. But then it was after that I just got burnt out. And I've been in this weird phase where I'm like, I'm not doing it every day. Am I okay with that? I don't know how I feel about it, if it changes anything about like my identity or like making me worry or question myself.
I think that's part of it too, though, right?
Yeah.
The ebbs and flows.
That's what I've heard. That's what I've heard from people who've been writing longer than me, where they're like, it ebbs and flows, just like everything. So I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'm just not going to freak out about it then. But I am slightly freaking out about it a little bit.
What is one piece of writing that makes you jealous you didn't write it?
I love feeling jealous of writing in a way, because I think part of it is because like from editing, if I read something and I was like, oh man, I wish I'd written this, then I would publish it. Like that was kind of my barometer for it. So it's hard to like have like one piece because there's a lot of good writing out there, but I can't think of like any one thing like in particular.
What's one thing that you have edited that you were like, damn, I got to publish this?
There is this short story that Nicola May Goldberg wrote that I published in Witchcraft. It's like a retelling of Bluebeard, but the last line of the story is there's nothing more beautiful than a dead girl. And I always like wish I had written that. It's so good. It's good for a last line.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a good one. Okay, so let's get into your whole body of work. So, since you were 26, that's like most of your adulthood. How did you get from 2013 of like, yes, I can literary journals, I sort of understand how this world works to Animals Eat Each Other, which was right your first book in 2017.
Hmm. So I was doing every single workshop that I could find because I was like, MFAs were just expensive. Like they were just out of reach for me. Like I was like, there's no way I'm going to be able to do this. I did try like 1 year after I was like finishing with animals, but then yeah, I was like, I only applied to like 3 schools that were fully funded, and I was like, if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But I was just taking every workshop I could find that I wanted to take. I was taking this one workshop with Ray Guran. She's a poet. And it's like 6 month workshop, and it's literally just generative. It's not necessarily about learning. It's just about committing for 6 months to
I
have
love that.
pages every month. Yeah. And I wrote this short story in there. And then I started working again with Tom Spanbauer, where I owed him like 20 pages every 2 weeks. And we did that with the short story. And what started happening was he was like, you have like all this stuff that you need to expand on, that you should be expanding on. And so I started doing that until really like we did that together for like 2 years. Like I would just meet with him, and then he would talk to me about the work. Like he would read it aloud, and we would talk about the work and
Mm.
what's missing and like what it needed. And then it was during that time I was getting some stuff, like some short stories published and like meeting people. And I'd had someone reach out to me and ask me like what I was working on. And he ended up passing the manuscript to someone at Desank. So I got really lucky in that it was like not 100% finished, but it was like there almost. That like
Mm-hmm.
almost, I think, never happens. Maybe in the indie world, I think it happens a lot more. So that was basically like it. Like they were just like, yeah, like let's publish this. This seems good.
Amazing.
So then that happened. Yeah.
So, for listeners, what's the premise of Animals Eat Each Other?
The most basic premise I can tell you is that a 19-year-old narrator falls in love with a couple who has a kid. She starts dating them, and it essentially like ends up just as badly as you think it might.
Yep. So did you do a big editing process, or were they like more minor tweaks?
So the thing that happened was that the book got bought, like I signed my contract. Then the editor like disappeared for a long time. And
Oh my
during that
God.
process, I was working on other stuff. And then I moved to Arkansas. And then there was a new editor all of a sudden. I guess like the previous editor in chief just had to step down because like things were too much, like there was too much going on in his
Uh-huh.
life. Like he had other personal stuff going on. He was stepping down. So a new editor chief came in, and she's really great, but like she also wasn't the acquiring editor, and she didn't have a lot to say about editing the book, just kind of like minor things here and there. And there was stuff that I knew that I needed to do to complete it. So it really
Mm-hmm.
was just kind of like me on my own trying to figure it out and figure out the structure. And I did a big editing process. I would like make note cards for each chapter, trying to make sense of it, print it out, try and move stuff around in the way that I needed. And then even like editing it from backwards to the front, like starting with the last chapter and working backwards to make sure that everything made sense and that kind of thing. And I was just kind of doing that all on my own. And then the editor in chief did like a basic like copy edit.
Uh-huh.
And so that really was that process. So it was not that intensive, like as far as that goes.
It's kind of nice to get that much freedom though. And like you're an editor, right? Don't you do that
Yeah.
for, professionally? And so when you're approaching a rewrite or an edit, what are you doing to like diagnose what's wrong? And do you have any like tips for going in and doing like when you need to do a big overhaul?
Yeah, editing your own work is so difficult because you're already inside of it. I even think like psychologically, like there's a thing where the story's already in your head. So you're going to be more likely to miss things that aren't complete in the story because your brain already has a full picture of it. It's not going to like sometimes miss like the pockets, you know? But it's really, I don't want to say easy, but to edit for style, what you can do is like you have to be really hard on yourself about sound. Like if you read something that you're writing and like there's just something in your head that's like I am not quite satisfied with it, then like you can't let go of it. Like you have to have the discipline to keep working on it and like not let go of it. And that's the part that can become really difficult because that can be really time consuming in a way.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's one way I go into it is just like it's a feel. Like if it doesn't, like if you are reading your own stuff, if you feel bored with something that you're reading that's yours, like when you're going through something like with a novel, it's going to be boring to someone else. So it's really just about trying to be really sensitive to like how you feel about the thing, like when you're writing it.
What about for structure? Like when you're like, oh, there's something about this structure or format that's like not working. Is there anything special you do in that case?
So I've like gone through writing novels a couple of different ways. But for animals, because I didn't know what I was doing, like I was like, I don't know how to write. Like I didn't even know like basic elements of fiction when I was writing, like in the traditional sense. Like I was like, what is a plot? Like, or like, you know
Right.
what I mean? Like those kinds of
Yeah.
things. Like, what is the three act structure? I don't know what that stuff is. I was never taught that kind of stuff. But I think just in terms of like having the scenes like make logical sense, one thing I did was I did just like write out scenes and chapters on note cards. And that kind of helped me organize it in my mind. So that way I
Uh-huh.
could like look at it, just the basic scenes, right? And see that that made sense. And I've also done that with the novel that comes out next year, where not with note cards, but I had like this little sheet of like tracking each scene, what happens in it, if anything changes, like if there's emotional resonance in it and that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's kind of like when I maybe have more experience writing screenplays, but like when you distill it back to an outline version, if you've written a draft and some things have changed, and then you go back and you like make an outline of that, a lot of times you can use that to, this scene is not active, or like you can tell when you distill it down what's wrong in a way.
Yeah.
Okay, so then nudes was next.
Hmm.
And what's the premise of nudes?
Yeah, it's just short stories that I wrote that I've been writing since like 2014. But a lot of like, I mean, just I think it's yeah, from 2014 to 2020 when the book came out. It's just like a collection of like the stuff that I liked the most that I think fit together like really well.
When did it sort of like become cohesive as a book idea?
I had like wanted to put together some kind of collection since like animals had come out, but like I'd gotten an agent and my agent was like, short story collections don't sell. And so in my head, I was like, well, like, okay, then, like,
Mm-hmm.
but I like short stories. So I want to figure out what I can do. And like right before my daughter was born, I had done this little chat book called Avoca of just like little vignettes of living in the American South or the Ozarks or whatever you want to call it. And so I kind of was like going from there where I was like, well, I have these little vignettes and I have older stuff. And I think it was when Elizabeth Allen, whom like I was already friends with, was like, I really want to like, you know, publish something of yours if you want to send me something. And so I was like, okay, then I want to do a collection. Like this is what I
Mm-hmm.
want to do and I want to put together something. And it was then that I think I started working more seriously on having like I mean, I don't know. I was just kind of like writing stories at the time. Like my baby was born, and then I was like obsessive about writing stuff. So I was like trying to work on the stories. I'd finished the first draft of a novel and I was tired of it. So I wanted to do something else that was more distracting. And so I started working on trying to flesh out these vignettes and these ideas and stuff that I had in my head. And like, yeah, I just wanted to like pull it together that way.
It has such a strong aesthetic. And like, was that always part of the vision from the beginning, or did that kind of like develop over time?
I think it just developed over time. I think it really is just like I'm writing to my taste. I'm writing about like women that I'm interested in and experiences that I'm interested in reading about, things I see, things I want to see like represented, emotions and atmospheres that I can't stop thinking about. And I think it works together because it's like from my head. You
Mm-hmm.
know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean?
Elizabeth Ellen keeps coming up on the podcast, and she has been behind like a lot of my favorite books. So I'm just kind of curious what it's like the process of working with her and things that you gleaned from working with her.
I honestly like don't even know how to describe it. She just has so much wisdom in terms of darkness and edginess and knowing what makes something good. I don't know. She also is really good at like pulling me back. Like I think I have a tendency to go all out with like descriptions, or sometimes I will just have a lot of exposition in a story. Like that's one of my bad writer habits, is lots of exposition. And she knows like how to like pull that back and say like less is more with
Mm-hmm.
me. And she's got a brilliant mind. Like she doesn't really use social media. She doesn't have a smartphone. She's never had that. So her brain isn't like rotten from like
Mm-hmm.
Instagram and that kind of thing. And so I think that the way that she looks at art and like looks at the world is just something that is not really common in the writer world today. So I think that's one thing I really treasure about it. I think that like a lot of social media tends to cause us to like water down our language
Mm-hmm.
and make things really flat. But yeah, Mary Gateskill just like had a Substack about that or something, which I was like, no, it makes sense. Like I can see it. Everything good that I'm reading comes out of indie lit now. I'm trying to remember like the last like really big mainstream book that I was like obsessed with.
Yeah.
The Atticus Lish book that he did was really good. That is one mainstream book that I really liked.
So you work just in general, like there are a lot of interesting kind of formats that you play with or perspectives or things like that. How do you find that stuff and kind of decide when to use it and when to stick with more of a standard structure?
Oh, like different story formats and that kind of thing.
Yeah, or like in gag reflux, like live journal stuff and like putting your calorie counts or just having it be a different POV or something like that. Like, how do you decide when to employ those techniques?
I think the biggest deciding factor for me in how anything is structured comes down to how close you are to the person's like psychic experience. So, like, I think about that term a lot, psychic distance, and it's like, how far away are you from this character? I sometimes find it really hard to enjoy third person because in a lot of third person stories, I tend to just feel too distant from the narrator or the character that like I'm reading about. And like I want to like feel close to them. I want to like forget that like I'm a person. I want to be experiencing this character as close as I can. So I think like that's a big thing I think about is when I'm structuring something is like, how can I make sure that we are as close as possible to that experience and that there isn't distance, that we're not putting like obstacles between like reader and like atmosphere or reader and like experience.
So some of those things like the calorie thing or whatever is like just a way to be in the head of the person who's doing it or make it feel like more of the experience itself.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, what is more of an experience of what it feels like to be obsessed with something than forcing another person to like read your lists that you're writing with these numbers that don't really, maybe don't even matter. And like, you have to read through them again and again and see how they're crossed out again and again, like that kind of thing. Like, that's what that experience is like. Do you feel like it's tedious? Well, congratulations. That experience is
Totally.
absolutely tedious. So that's kind of like what I think I was thinking.
Yeah, exactly. No, when I saw that part, I was like, did she publish my calorie journal or what's going on here?
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of us have been through that same kind of obsessive tracking and it is totally neurotic.
Yeah.
Anyway, so what was the news then after, Elizabeth officially bought it? What was the publishing process like for that and the reaction after?
It's really great. I honestly feel like I've been so spoiled as a writer because I've had a lot of like creative control and freedom over how I want the stories in the book to be structured. Like I want them to be in these different sections, right? I get to decide that. Like I think maybe a bigger publisher would be like, no, we're going to do like whatever we think is best, or we're going to override this decision or something. I got to have control over the covers. So her and I brainstormed a bunch of different ideas, and then I ended up taking the photo for it. And then Chelsea Martin designed it. She did such a good job with the typography on it. I got to choose the font that is the headers and the section breaks and stuff. Like I got to have this creative control over how the book looks like when it's done, which I think is something that's really great about indie publishing. I think when you're published by a bigger publisher, you may not always have that control. Like we've heard about people not liking their covers, or like they might design the book and say like, well, this is the font we're using and this is how we want to lay it out, you know? So it's nice to have control over like what the book looks and feels like as a finished product.
Okay, so you mentioned you got an agent somewhere along the line. How did that come about?
So Animals Eat Each Other got a starred review in Publishers Weekly. And that's, I guess, something that's like, they don't really hand out a lot of those per year. And so when it got that kind of attention, I had like 3 different agents just reach out to me like within the next few days.
Nice.
Just saying like, what are you working on? Are you looking for representation? Like that kind of thing. And I didn't have anything that was like even close to like halfway done at that point. So like one of my biggest pieces of advice, I guess, like when someone's writing a novel is that like continue writing the next one. Because if you hit that point where the book gets published and then you have that agent like reach out to you, like you kind of probably want to have something ready to go. So that way you can always keep moving forward. But I did talk with Kent Wolf, who is now my agent. He's at Neon Literary. And like, yeah, I showed him
He's the shit. His list is so good. I love that.
Yeah. And I showed him like what I was working on and told him my ideas. And he really loved it. And I told him like what my next manuscript, like what I was planning on doing with it and that kind of thing. And he loved that. So he did decide to work with me, which I'm really grateful for on that front. So yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay. So which brings us to Gag Reflex. Were you represented going into this book?
No, because I really only planned for this to be like, I just wanted it to be like a little indie thing. Like I kind of wasn't even thinking about it. I feel like my agent must be so frustrated with me because Nudes is also not represented. Like, so I put out 2 books with him as my agent, and those 2 are not like, he hasn't represented. They're just been like little indie things. But the next book is one that he helped with, which is good. That one comes out next year. But yeah, I just was like, I just want to put out something fun. Like, you know, when people put out chapbooks and stuff, that was just kind of how I envisioned it. And so I even just approached Clash and I was like, I have this idea of making it a live journal. Like I knew I would be able to work with them to be like, who can you work with to literally make this layout look like a live journal, you know? And they really love the idea. Like they also put out Daryl, like they do such a good job of taking a chance on like experimental work. I mean, I don't think there's any way in hell like Kent would have been able to shop this to like Grove Atlantic or something like that. You know what I mean? So it was just like a one-off thing. Like I was like, I just want this in the universe and I want it to be fun. So
yeah, it's really an interesting concept. So when did that idea kind of form, and how long did the writing process of it take, and how much were you like repurposing that you already had or whatever happened?
I'd always wanted to write something about eating disorders, but I didn't know how to tackle it. And then in 2019, maybe a little bit later than that, I was talking to B.R. Yeager, who is the author of Amygdalatropolis and Negative Space. And we both started talking about Life Journal. And I was like, I'm going to go find mine. And I actually could find mine all the way back to when I was like 13 years old and like just starting out, like having this kind of space on the internet. Really, like I had AOL chat and that kind of stuff before, but I like was also making GeoCities sites and stuff at like the same time. But like LiveJournal was really it was Diaryland and LiveJournal, but I had LiveJournal first, I think. And then Diaryland was like my little poetry repository while I was in high school, and LiveJournal was less poetry and more like my personal life and that kind of thing. But I kind of like just got lost in it, and like we both were like reading our life journals like, yeah, this is so like it's so 2005. Like there's nothing else like that kind of experience. I also was inspired by 1982 Janine by Alistair Gray, which is also one of the most incredible books I've ever read. I had read that right before COVID started, actually, like a month or two, like COVID had started. And I just actually kind of loved the title. It's so unique. And there is like really unique topography in it too. So I had thought, I was like, I want to write something that's called Gag Reflex 2005. Like I kind of want to like bite that style. But the distribution that Clash has, they had suggested not using the 2005 because they thought that it wouldn't have as much like shelf
life,
shelf appeal or whatever. Yeah, like it would be more marketable. And I was kind of like, I don't know. But I was also like, okay, I see like what they're saying. I'll just try it, you know? So
I feel like Gag Reflex is so strong on its own. I like the nostalgia piece of it, but I get what they were saying too.
Yeah.
You've mentioned a little bit of it, but what's the premise of Gag Reflex?
So Gag Reflex is a live journal from a girl's last semester in high school through summer, in which she's just dealing with an eating disorder and kind of trying to unravel like sort of the root of that suffering on her own in a way.
And then how big of an edit did you do with Clash?
I'm trying to think. It wasn't like too intense, but Christoph had really good things to say in terms of like if he felt something was missing or in terms of like the pacing and that kind of thing. Like there wasn't a ton of editing that he did on voice because I did like a pretty thorough comb of that like several times through. But he would be like, this post feels like it needs to feel like we need to have a different kind of post after this, right? In terms of like the rhythm and stuff. And so that was something that I worked on with him. And then just making sure every single detail was correct was like really a task. Like the layout has to be correct because it's all hand laid out. It's not like it's like a template with a master page. It's literally like every page is unique and you have to make sure the timestamps are correct and you have to make sure the way the music is laid out is the same and all that kind of stuff. Like it all has to chronologically make sense. So that was a process.
Yeah. And then you mentioned that you have upcoming another book, but is it Deliver Me? Is that the one? I saw that on your website.
That comes out next October.
What's that one about?
So I'm like trying to think of a way to succinctly talk about it.
You haven't had to start pitching it yet.
Well, I just don't want to like give away the story too much because
whatever you can say.
It's a little bit of a thriller. It's like kind of like thriller / body horror. So this girl is basically an ex-evangelical. Like she grew up in the United Pentecostal Church and she works at a chicken factory and she wants really badly to have a baby, but she can't get pregnant. And during this time, her former best friend moves back to town, whom she was also kind of in love with. And so it's kind of about her being with her boyfriend and trying to like hold on to him. And then also like contending with her obsession with her best friend, who is pregnant. And then she ends up faking her pregnancy as well. So it's kind of just about the pull between like those characters in that experience.
Interesting.
Yeah.
When did you get the idea? I love that you have like a certain working class sensibility that doesn't always get repped as a girl from a small town in Minnesota. So where did you get the idea for that? And like, are you done? Where are you at in the process?
So in 2015, there was a really horrific crime in the city I was living in. That's like a really fringe crime. And I was like, I cannot stop thinking about this story. Like I was just obsessed with it. And like kind of just like being inspired by living in the Ozarks in a way. there's something really special about Arkansas. Like I really did love living there. I would never live in Little Rock, but like Northwest Arkansas is like perfect. It's like a little gem of a place. The people are wonderful. The weather is like beautiful, that kind of thing. There's never really any bad tornadoes. It's like it's just on the outside of
Mhm.
Tornado Alley. And I just love living there like so much. So I think that was really where both of those things kind of like coalesced. And it was like right after having my baby, I was like trying to write this. I was actually trying to write a story about this girl and like dealing with eating disorders. And I was like, I can't do this. I was trying to rewrite it several times. I remember sending it to Elizabeth, and then she was like, I think you've overwritten this. It doesn't feel as dark and intellectual as like you normally do. And I was gutted. But I was like in the fog of like having a newborn and stuff. So I was like, fuck it. Like, I'm just going to write my basic bitch plotted novel. And I read a book about like how to make a plot, like how to like do something in a traditional way.
Right.
Right. So then, yeah, right. So like all those years later, Elle learns what the fuck a plot is and like the 3 act structure and like tries to write a book. So that was like kind of the outcome like of that process.
It doesn't sound like a basic bitch book.
When I finally finished it, I was like, no, this is actually it is becoming more of like what I feel like is me, you know? And it isn't done yet. I'm just doing final edits right now. So
Ooh,
soon. Yeah.
sounds cool. So you mentioned like the fog of motherhood. I'm curious how, just in whatever ways, becoming a mom has changed your writing for better or worse.
So how has it changed it? When my daughter was first born, I did get really obsessive and just like wrote as much as I could all the time. It was really hard at first because you are kind of in a brain fog, just like hormone wise. Like there's literally nothing you can do about it. It is, I think it is absolutely biological, especially like with breastfeeding and stuff, because that's just how the hormones are working in your body.
Mm-hmm.
And then I kind of like came out of that and like I hit a period of like this peak production. And I think one thing that is good about it is that it's really deepened my understanding of like human nature. I don't know how to describe it exactly. Being a parent has like stretched me in a way where it's like that phrase, like go digging deep, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it's like when you know you have to do something, even though you don't always want to. I've just gotten a lot better at that side of it. And so, like, when it comes to like doing difficult things, I guess, you know, writing is no longer like the difficult thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I also learned like you can't just like write when the inspiration strikes you. Like you have to be able to, when you only have like 10 minutes, you have to be able to sit down and just like force yourself, even when it's bad.
Those are good lessons. So you teach, and we mentioned before you're an editor. How does that kind of stuff inform your writing process? And what is textures like? That's your writing lab, right?
Yeah. So it's on hold right now just because like I have to work a normie job while I'm living in Glasgow currently. So that way I just can get stable. And so like
Mm-hmm.
my husband can get his spouse visa and that kind of thing. But editing and teaching has like taught me about writing without making me realize I was teaching myself about writing. It's just made me more observant as a writer. And I've gotten like a lot better and faster at editing in general because of it. And I think it really is one of my favorite things. I love running workshops. I love working one on one with someone where like we're trying to talk out the reason why a sentence isn't working and then like talking it through and then seeing like their eyes light up or whatever, like make the
Huh.
connection. I think that's like such a good feeling. I really love that about just working stuff out in general. Cause I think sometimes like you get the best stuff when you're just trying to talk out what something means. You know what I
Uh-huh.
mean? Like when you're trying to tell something like what it's like, what does this metaphor mean? And you're like talking out, you're actually like, oh, that is actually what I just said is actually 100% better way to say it than this dumbass metaphor that doesn't work.
Yeah.
You know, like I love that about workshopping. And so when Textures runs, it's a 3 month program and you get new lessons every week. And then we like edit a certain amount of pages every month. And then we'll do like one-on-one, I'll do like one-on-one mentorships via video or whatever, where it's like, this is where the pages are, like, tell me what you're struggling with. What kind of obstacles can like we help you overcome is like that kind of thing. So
I love that. Well, I've gotten so much out of just any of the workshops that I've done, in the
Yeah.
literary space. And it sounds like you did too. And it's cool that you're like helping the next generation.
Yeah. It's good. I love it.
Okay. So, our wrap up questions, I guess, do you have any bucket list goals
Like overall in life,
for your writing?
I want to publish a story about a juggalette in the Paris Review. That's my bucket list. I want to get ICP in a highbrow culture. That's what I want.
I love it.
Yeah.
What's one piece of writing advice you wish you could give your former self?
Maybe like less is more, or like use less metaphors, honestly. I would say that. Yeah. Stop being like so purple. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
One tip for writers trying to get a book published.
I would say don't spray and pray when it comes to doing queries, but also the number one predictor of success in publication is perseverance. It's not talent.
Good tip. What's your all-time favorite piece of your own writing?
One of my favorite stories is Cat World. I just love that world and the time and that story so much. I was really proud of that story. It took like 5 different iterations and like 3 years before I was like happy with that story.
Nice.
And people liked it, so that made it even better. So I was like, cool. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And how can listeners connect with you on the internet?
So I'm on Twitter at Sataerotica. I'm on Instagram at Sataerotica. And my website is ellenash.net. And right now it's 2005 on my website. And I also have a MySpace page on it if you can find it. That's how you can connect with me.
Thank you so much, Elle. Oh, that conversation was a blast, and I learned a ton. And that is it for this edition of The Bleeders. If you missed the last episode with Emmy Olea and her work in progress, Emmy Like the Award, make sure to go back and check it out. Here is a little preview.
And then one of my friends said, you've had a really shitty year. You had your breakup, your grandfather just passed away. Let's go to Barcelona. And I thought, Barcelona? He's like, yeah, we're gonna go. It's gonna be great. So I get to Barcelona and I'm like depressed about my breakup. I'm not having a good time. And I find this little nook in this Airbnb that we were staying in. And I just grabbed my laptop and I said, I'm going to rewrite this book here. And that's what I did. I rewrote it in Barcelona. For the whole time that I was there, I was pretty much stuck in this little nook, just typing and writing.
That is such a good story. You have to listen to that episode if you haven't already. Thank you for joining me for this episode of The Bleeders. I have to say, writing is so much better with friends. I'm your host, Courtney Kosak, and hey, let's connect on social media. I am at Courtney Kosak, Kocak, on Twitter and Instagram. And make sure you're signed up for the Bleeders Companion Substack. The link is in the episode description. And I hope you'll join me next Thursday for the first ever edition of Prompt Me, Daddy. In the meantime, happy bleeding.